Sorry?
I just said good morning, Madam
Oh,
Chair.
good morning, good morning. So we'll just go ahead and get started then, okay? Thank you for adjusting. I apologize, I had a slight conflict. I needed to push back the hearing. Very well. Good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Ops. It is Monday, October 5th, and we're here today for a virtual working session on Docket 0226, an ordinance to provide for the safe disposal of sharps through the establishment of a product stewardship program. Councilor Anissa Sabi George, is the sponsor of this matter, is referred to the committee on January 29, 2020. In accordance with Governor Baker's executive order, we are hosting this hearing on Zoom, which allows for us to carry out our business while at the same time balancing public health needs. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8 RCN 82, Verizon 1964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov. Excuse me. This proposal will establish a product stewardship program for the safe collection and disposal of sharps. The manufacturers of the sharps would be required to work with retailers, that sell sharps for personal use to take back sharps at the end of life with no additional cost to the consumer. The proposal would provide consumers with more convenient options to return sharps and will ensure the safe and environmentally sound disposal of personal use sharps. The proposal sets forth requirements that product stewardship plans must adhere to. The city's inspectional services department will have jurisdiction over the provisions of this proposal. Joining us today from the administration are Chris English, Chief of Staff for ISD, PJ McCann, Legal Counsel for the Boston Public Health Commission, Jen Tracy, Director of Recovery Services, and Leon Bethune, Director of Environmental Health Division of the Boston Public Health Commission. Also joining us today are my colleagues, along with myself. I have the lead sponsor, Councilor at Large Anissa Sabi George, District 9 City Councilor Liz Braden, District 2 City Councilor Ed Flynn, District 6, District 6 City Councilor Matt O'Malley, and Councilor at Large Councilor at Large Julia Mejia. Have I missed any of my other colleagues? Very well. Councilor Sabi George, if you'd like to kick off opening statements, and to my colleagues that are on, if we could, again, just for brevity, and because I unfortunately had to delay the start of this, if we could just limit our opening statements to very brief statements, and then we'll go right to the administration's response.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to colleagues for being here, and certainly the administration for being here and their partnership and work on this effort, which started a number of years ago with an original filing of an ordinance, some significant modifications, and a refiling, I think, last year, and then again at the beginning of this year. The document that we are looking at reviewing today is actually very dramatically changed from the one that was filed at the beginning of this year, almost more reflective of the original filing of this ordinance. And that was, this is due to a lot of detailed conversation, and I think very thoughtful conversation from the administration and those that would be overseeing this work, and to make sure that it's appropriate and reflective of the needs, and also very considerate, I think, of the impacts that this would have on small businesses, some of the small locally owned pharmacies in the city of Boston. So I look forward to today's conversation in detail to some of those changes, and then some of the recommendations that I have to sort of tweak and I think perfect the ordinance as it's presented today, which is different than the one that was filed. So, Madam Chair, if I could just call that attention to everyone who'll be reviewing those documents today, that we do have a very much modified version of what was filed and what we had planned to discuss for today's hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who's here today.
Thank you very much. Councilor Liz Braden.
I believe Councilor Breeden was on a phone call and maybe stepped away.
Okay. Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George, for sponsoring this ordinance, and to Councilor Edwards for chairing this working session. It is important that we have a safe way to dispose of our needles and shops. Needles are an environmental and health hazard, and when there is no good way of disposing them, there is a risk to our residents. Children can be pricked and harmed by them. I think having a stewardship program for needle disposal is a great idea, because shops are not only used by those who inject drugs, but also by people with certain medical conditions. So there is a need for stewardship program that can be used by everyone. I look forward to learning more about the details of this ordinance and see how we can have a safe way to safely dispose of our needles in shops. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor O'Malley? Nope. Okay. Counselor Mejia?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councilor Sabi George, for holding this hearing. I want to take some time to quickly highlight some of the amazing community activists who have been doing incredible work really hard around this issue. People like Leon Rivera, Jahaira Lopez, Domingo de la Rosa, and the South End and Roxbury residents. They have been doing weekly needle cleanups for as long as I can remember. It goes back to, good Lord, which just makes me realize how long we've been having this conversation and how long this has been impacting our community. And back in the 90s, as a public health educator, I was out having the same conversation. So I'm looking forward to participating in this session and figuring out what we can do as a city together to work through this issue. And I'm excited to start. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the administration. Everyone should have the modified ordinance. As Councilor Sabi George noted, this is a change from what was initially filed. So I'm not really sure if you guys have a order of talking that you'd like to do, or is there someone from the administration who's going to be doing the majority of it, and there's folks here for backup? How did you want to approach this?
I imagine that we may start with Attorney McCann. He's been, I think, a real partner and colleague in this work since the beginning, and we sort of reflected back together on how we've sort of gone back to the beginning with this ordinance. And if Madam Chair, if I could just say, I really do appreciate Councilor Flynn's comments around proper disposal. And, I went right into the ordinance itself, but Councilor Flynn brought up how important it is for our residents across the city to have access to proper disposal. This is certainly related to the conversation we've had around improper disposal, thinking about those dealing with substance use disorders. But this is really about creating opportunities for our residents across the city who are dealing with diabetes, requiring other sorts of shots, whether it's a B12 shot. Many of our seniors use a B12 shot for their health needs. If you're dealing with infertility treatments, you're using oftentimes a hormone injection. Those needles need to be properly disposed. We also know too many of our residents are dealing with addiction across our city and dealing with addiction at home, and proper disposal is important. We have less than 20 needle kiosks across our city. I forget what the number is today. And an ordinance like this would get us to a point where we had about 100 kiosks across the city in all of our neighborhoods and accessible to all of our residents. So I think PJ might be the best person to start with, if I could say so, and then we'll go from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. PJ?
Well, thank you for that, Councilor. If it's okay with the chair, I would like to turn it over to Director Tracy, because she does have an opening statement for the administration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Edwards and members of the committee. I'm Jen Tracy, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Recovery Services. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this working session on this very important, as it has been said, public health and quality of life issue. The Office of Recovery Services mission is to advance equitable and comprehensive substance use recovery by increasing access to care and filling critical gaps. We offer a full continuum of care, from harm reduction to recovery supports, focusing on each step of the recovery continuum. I want to start by thanking Councilor Sabi George for her longstanding leadership on this issue. and for filing this legislation. Having a robust, safe sharps disposal infrastructure in Boston is necessary to protect residents, city workers, first responders, and people struggling with substance use disorder and the environment. As you know, urban centers all over the country are grappling with these quality of life challenges. And in Boston, we have increased the way we collect improperly disposed syringes, requiring all staff across all programs to join the effort. The main ways we collect syringes are through active drug users, outreach and the mobile sharps team, neighborhood kiosks, and with our community partners. I want to acknowledge that this has been an all hands on deck approach across city government under Mayor Walsh's leadership, including the efforts of Boston EMS, Inspectional Services Department, the Parks Department, Boston Public Schools, Boston Housing Authority, Department of Public Works, ONS, 311, and others. The Office of Recovery Services and the Boston Public Health Commission have worked to build a comprehensive approach for addressing needle disposal in the city. That is an integral part of our harm reduction infrastructure. The Commission, through our AHOPE program, Access Harm Reduction Overdose Prevention and Education Program, runs one of the busiest and longest standing safe syringe programs in the state. And as you know, safe syringe programs are part of a broader infectious disease prevention strategy. AHOPE helps to prevent transmission of HIV/AIDS and Hep C by supplying clean needles and ensuring proper disposal of used needles. AHOPE is a leader providing critical, important work connecting active drug users to treatment when they are ready, and provides services that include HIV, STI testing, Narcan, overdose prevention, linkages to medical care, behavioral health, and social services. They also play an important role in preventing sharps from being improperly discarded. Last summer, with funding from Mayor Walsh and the City Council, we contracted for the first time with a biohazard waste company to collect sharps from all city-funded kiosks. This has allowed the mobile sharps team more time to respond to 311 calls and proactively sweep parks, schools, and other high traffic areas. In addition, the sharps team has increased from the beginning of 2 full-time workers to 6, working across 7 days a week, responding to 311 calls and requests. This investment has allowed for quicker response time. The service continues to receive positive feedback from constituents across the city. Tracking the pickup locations has also added to our understanding of patterns of use for targeting outreach efforts. As another part of that expansion, we continue to increase the city-managed needle kiosks that are now available in 10 locations. These are outdoor locations which are accessible 24/7. With more access to sharps disposal, more syringes are being collected. The FY20 total of syringes collected from kiosks alone is a little over 150,000 compared to a little under 50,000 the year before. There are also additional indoor kiosk sites in Boston, and these are managed by the State Department of Public Health, which I want to acknowledge has done a great deal of work providing safe disposal kiosks throughout the state and continues to support the expansion of safe syringe programs and overdose prevention programs outside of Boston and throughout the state. The Sharps team is a key member of the city's coordinated response team and works closely with the Boston Public Schools and Parks Department to prioritize parks and schoolyards. AHOPE staff routinely conduct outreach in Boston neighborhoods. Through the Commission's Office of Environmental Health, we provide training on safe sharps disposal to Boston Public School staff, Boston Housing Authority, Parks Department, and other agency staff. We're also happy to partner with Councilor Asabi George's Needle Take Back Day, the past couple of years allowing opportunity for our community health centers to join the effort. Maintaining a system to ensure the safe disposal of sharps in the city of Boston is an enormous undertaking that requires collaboration across all our city departments and community partners. The administration is grateful for the partnership of the City Council in funding the mobile sharps team and other investments over the past years to expand sharps collection infrastructure in Boston. The scope of the investment in time and effort to address safe sharps disposal speaks to the need for upstream solutions to ensure citywide access to safe sharps disposal sites. We look forward to working with you to craft a workable policy solution to this problem. Thank you again for the opportunity to continue this important dialogue. I'm joined by my colleagues mentioned earlier, ISD Chief of Staff Christopher English, Boston Public Health Commission's Community Initiatives Bureau Director Leon Butane, and Deputy General Counsel PJ McCann. We welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councilor Baker. Councilor Baker, did you want to any brief remarks before we go
No,
into?
I'm good. Thank you for everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so so if I understand this, you wanted us to just kind of break down or go through the ordinance with you. How was the did you have any direct responses? I appreciate the breakdown from Jennifer, Tracy, about all of the services. I even more appreciate seeing that beautiful little baby, Councilor O'Malley. I love it. But I appreciate the breakdown of the city services. Thank you for noting that there, instead of 7, we now have 10 kiosks. It looks like it's growing. You've added staff. This is something the city is committed to enhancing and growing already. But as you can see in the ordinance, this is about bringing in partnerships from private entities and pharmacies. And you know, as they are the number one, I think they are the number one creators of sharps and putting that into the consumer's hands. And so inviting them to the table is something that I'm very excited about. And I really do appreciate the lead sponsors push for this. And so I think I'll just go ahead and put out there, I'm curious about your thoughts about the legality of that and the language as it stands right now. Is this something the administration supports?
Madam Chair, are you asking that question of Jen, myself, or PJ?
I'm asking that of the administration, whomever wants to say it. I know you support it, Councilor Sabi George. I support it too, but I want to know what the administration is thinking about it. It's working on this language, so.
Okay, PJ, well,
I don't know, so many.
I think the intent of providing more options for residents to properly dispose of syringes, we are very much in support of. We want to, work with the council on policy solutions to address this.
So let's just go and break it down for the language in the proposed ordinance. We're looking at 12-16.3 Safe Sharps Disposal Program. Let's just look at A, or the beginning. All pharmacies, as defined in this section, which would include CVS, Walgreens, all the local folks who are pharmacies, that they establish a collection system to provide convenient, ongoing collection services to all persons seeking to dispose of unwanted sharps, which shall include collection kiosks or other safe and secure means of collection. Notwithstanding the foregoing, a pharmacy chain may present an alternative proposal for approval by the department in consultation with the Boston Public Health Commission. And I'm just kind of going through it, but such proposals must include the exact proposed locations of each collection site and the contact information. To me, this language is wonderfully inviting for them to be a partner, either directly through what we suggest, that they have their own collection policy, or that they set up kiosks and enhance what the city is doing. So we'll go to Attorney McCann on that language specifically.
Yeah, so that you're correct in that, thinking back to earlier hearings on the topic, we did hear from the retailers that the lack of flexibility in the initial proposal, where they needed to be on site at each pharmacy, was sort of a big stumbling block. So in our proposal, or in our conversations with the counselor's office, we sort of suggested some flexibility here for sites that might not be on the physical property of the pharmacy, but the pharmacies, either individually or as chains, could be involved in bringing those into existence. So that is sort of borrowed from other jurisdictions that have gone down this path. A lot of jurisdictions sort of have different formulas depending on the population of the county and the number of pharmacies, and we sort of defer on the specifics there, but the general idea of being able to pay into an alternative system is something that has been brought into reality elsewhere.
Councilor Sabi George, I see that the language itself allows for a 1-year implementation date or effective date. I think that combined with the flexibility that they kind of come with their own plan about how they're going to assist, is that the balanced approach you were thinking about, giving them the time and the creativity?
Yeah, it's certainly, the hope is to have a balanced approach. The hope is to make sure that we put into practice, because on paper, it's always one thing. And then as we sort of enact it, we want to make sure that it is practical and makes sense. One of the pieces that's really important to us, and some of the edits to some of the suggestions to the ordinance as redrafted in partnership with the administration to speak to the comment and question around support. This redrafted version that we're discussing today is done in partnership with the administration. And I think that should indicate a tremendous amount of support for this effort. I do want all pharmacies to participate in this, and think that it's really important when we think about distribution across our city, that's really important. And if we reflect back on drug take back kiosks and now pharmacies doing drug take back across the board, that was a difficult sort of battle to happen. And now it's just part of regular practice. I think that doing this in partnership with our pharmacies, especially our large chain retail pharmacies across the city of Boston, will actually lead to a statewide effort. There's been conversations on the state level to make this happen. Ideally, it would have already happened at the state level, but that process has been slow. This is, really my hope is we just do it ourselves and they'll eventually follow suit. But the flexibility is also important too, because we do need opportunities in other places. I will say some of the edits that we've come up with in that 12-16.3 in A, the second sentence, I'm not sure if it's in the copy, if we sent you some of our edits and our suggested edits, but the collection kiosks or other means of collection we really want them on site and easily accessible and in visible locations for patrons to the pharmacy. Some of the creativity that we're certainly open to is these kiosks can be inside, and there's been some conversation over the years about the necessity for them to be within the eyesight of a pharmacist. But we actually would much prefer them to be outside the front door, because I think that creates less of a barrier to disposing of them. But if a pharmacy wanted to, for instance, suggest that the kiosk could be on the curb, if there was enough curb space for a drive-up method or something like that, I'd be more than excited to entertain that, as it might even be more easy or easier for a resident to drop off into the kiosk. One of the concerns that's come up a number of times, and it's just that creating of the partnership and others to do the work. Our pharmacies, for example, are required to sell needles individually, sharps, but also they sell them as part of a prescription if it's for an insulin or something of that nature. So they need to figure out a way to take back used sharps as well.
I'm going to turn it over shortly, but I would like, and this could go to the sponsor or to the administration, general curiosity, how much does, these are three questions, how much does a kiosk normally cost? Also, was there a minimum size for the pharmacies that you were thinking of? And then finally, I'm curious about the capacity. I think this question would go to Leon specifically for the Boston Public Health Commission to enforce this. So those are my three questions, and I will go to Councilor Brayton. So anyone know the cost of a kiosk?
It really does depend. I know maybe Leon does have it. I'm sorry. It does really depend on the size and the use. So the ones that the city puts up, the big metal sort of look like mailboxes, pretty heavy duty. Those are certainly more expensive than a smaller kiosk or a smaller bin. That could be one alternative, is something that attaches to the side of the drug take back kiosk that is like a large metal bin. And then depending on the size and depending on the volume that's collected, a pharmacy would have to dispose perhaps more regularly if it was a smaller container. And I'm sorry, Leon, to cut you off.
No, you're absolutely right, Counselor. I mean, they range from $2,000 to up to $3,000. per kiosk, and that usually includes making sure that there's a way to secure them to the ground. And so depending on where the location is, they may have to pour a concrete, kind of like a concrete pad so they can sit on and be secure. So that's one. Yeah, so I mean, like for the company that we use for our environmental company, they sell them and the ones we got, they run pretty much around $3,000. Thank you.
And then in terms of the capacity, since you're already talking, Leon, to enforce this.
So what we're thinking on the enforcement side is, so if pharmacy will send the Boston Public Health Commission sort of like a kiosk safety plan, basically suggesting where the location of the kiosk would be. We would look at that and also look at what they're using as a disposal company, because, of course, sharps need to be disposed of, in accordance with the state and federal regulations. So we would review that, and Chris can talk about inspectional services. They would provide the enforcement.
Sure. I think it shows a real partnership between the two agencies here, where reviewing the site plans and things like proposals would fall under public health. And then as the inspection and enforcement agency, ISD inspectors would be tasked with visiting the site to ensure compliance, and in cases of non-compliance with the ordinance, be able to issue violations in terms of monetary fines. So we have inspectors that are out inspecting pharmacies in terms of scales and registers, as well as price verification. So adding on a additional component to their inspection wouldn't necessarily require additional resources. It would be, as we see it, an additional component to the work that they're already doing there.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Councillor Braden. Maybe. All right, we'll go ahead then. After Councillor Braden is Councillor Flynn, then Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I don't have any questions. I just wanted to highlight the great work of Jen Tracy and her team on this very difficult and challenging issue. I see them working hard every day, and I just want to acknowledge their professionalism and hard work. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and thank you, Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley, then Councillor Mejia, then Councillor Baker. Councillor O'Malley. He's getting, he might be slightly distracted right now, but we'll go to Councillor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. I just have a quick question for Jen. And you mentioned that you have received positive feedback regarding the Needles program. Can you talk a little bit about where you've gone, what kind of feedback you've gotten so far? I'm asking this because I think feedback, a dashboard component to this ordinance, may be a good way for us to track the success of each proposal. So if there's a way for us to have a dashboard where there's feedback coming in that we can share it publicly. So I'm just curious, what have you heard?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So I'm referring to the Mobile Sharps team, which has been in operation for the past 5 years. So the positive feedback that we get from the community that utilizes 311 for Mobile Sharps pickup has been that the team is very fast acting, very responsive to the 311 calls. So that's typically the feedback that we get when we do, community walkarounds or and that type of work. And did you have another question? Sorry, that was
no,
the positive feedback. Oh, the dashboard. I just wanted to mention. So we did As part of MassCast 2.0, the mayor's plan, there is a public website now that does have some Sharps information on it, certainly not exhaustive, and would love to hear your feedback, and happy to send the link to the group.
And I'm just curious, in this particular initiative would be Councilor Sabi George for pharmacies to get the Sharpies. Is that so I'm clear?
So Sharps would be returned to pharmacies, as many shops are either purchased directly or purchased as part of prescription from pharmacies across the city of Boston. So
would they be then also responsible and open to taking needles from just anyone?
There's
Or
no,
just-
yeah, there's no restriction with needle take back. You don't have to show proof of purchase, or
Okay.
it's just another location in which to return them, because they are also available at pharmacies, and it is what's been tried in other parts of the country, and pharmacies become a great point of contact for any individual. As you know, you imagine if you have a chronic illness, you have diabetes, or you filling a prescription for fertility treatments, for injectables, and you are going to fill your prescription, it is logical to also dispose of your used needles, because they do have to be properly disposed of. They're not, needles should not, any Sharps should not be put in household trash. Sharps should not be flushed down toilets. Sharps should not be put obviously in public trash.
Yeah.
And proper disposal is really important, and pharmacies are a very logical place for that disposal to happen.
Thank you for that. And then I just have a few general questions about the ordinance overall, Councilor Edwards, and I'll be really quick. I'm just curious about how can we go about activating local nonprofits and community groups in this process? Will they be consulted when manufacturers present their plans? I'm just also curious in general, in terms of the ordinance states that part of the stewardship plan includes a public outreach component. How will we make sure that that public outreach respects cultural competency? Will it be available? Obviously, you know, I'm always going to ask about multiple languages. Just curious about the rollout. And this is kind of more of a clarifying question. Will there ever be a circumstance where a manufacturer could contract out the disposable of Sharps? And if that's the case, is there an opportunity for us to be intentional about requiring contracting to businesses of color? And then the last is, and for this ordinance, is there a way for applicants to receive feedback on their applications if they're denied? That's a lot. I'm not sure where you want to go, but I defer to the chair to help direct my questions as she sees fit. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are excellent questions. So let's start with, since we're following in the process and they would have to submit plans, let's start with public feedback, as Councilor Mejia is particularly concerned about. Those applications come into the city then. Beyond the city, 2 agencies mentioned, who else gets to see those applications and provide feedback?
I say right now in the drafting, there's nothing preventing further engagement with the community after plans come in, and the draft I think also includes some language about rulemaking if ISD or BPHC in conjunction with ISD want to put out additional guidance about about how those the community outreach happens and what happens once we get the plan. So I think there is certainly room within the current draft for both of those two issues to be addressed, and obviously there's also still flexibility within the draft of the actual language, but certainly nothing within this draft that prevents both of those 2 issues being addressed.
Councilor Sabi George, would it be amendable to some language that involve the community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the community could also be involved in some of the education requirements. So right now, when if you are picking up, for example, your insulin prescription that came with Sharps, there should be, and usually if anyone recalls sort of the process when they go to a pharmacy to pick up a prescription, is any questions about this, click, and the answer is typically, or the response is, I think very typically no, and you just sort of no on the touchpad. There would be a requirement for education around proper disposal, because right now we do know that there's it's generally accepted that you can take your sharps and put them into a coffee can or a detergent bottle, tape it shut and throw it away. That is improper disposal. So we really want to push and promote proper education around proper disposal. And that would include bringing back your sharps in a safe container to be disposed of appropriately at the pharmacy, but certainly open to all of those modifications.
In terms of then the dashboard, as Councillor Mejia brought up, specifically about how, and I think it's incredible. The idea also is monitoring where there's suddenly a concentration of needles and being deposited into the kiosks. If those kiosks you find are near certain playgrounds, right? Or not, but pharmacies that are near those playgrounds or in certain concentration community and areas. I think a dashboard component, being able to have data perpetually out there and being kept about where they're being disposed, how much, so on and so forth. Councilor Mejia, have I kind of gotten your dashboard question correct?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly ask, and I'm open to recording data as submitted by pharmacies on the amounts of sharps that they're receiving or disposing of. Most of that's all done based on weight. It's not needle for needle counting. And the other thing I would just caution though around the efficacy of that data is or the credibility of that data is depending on how a kiosk might be situated, the more easily accessible that kiosk is, the more it may be utilized. So for example, if it's within eyesight of the pharmacist, there is, oftentimes a lot of stigma attached to needle disposal, thinking that it's, there's just stigma attached to needle disposal. So if it's within eyesight, we may see lower rates of use of that kiosk. If it's at the front door, there may be, I'm making an assumption based, I think, on some realistic outlooks, it may be a little bit more used. And if it were something that was much more publicly accessible, it may even be more utilized. So I would just caution on sort of the credibility of certain data points, depending on actual location of any particular kiosk.
But still, would you be amendable to?
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it is important to understand where needle waste, sharp waste is coming from, but also hesitating to make judgment about the use of those sharps. Cats have diabetes, for example, and so many of our residents, and through some of our hearings over the years, had heard from residents who had hundreds of needles saved because they had diabetes, or a pet had diabetes, or they required fertility treatments, and they had these hundreds and hundreds of sharps. And during our citywide needle take back day that Jen mentioned, and thank you to the administration and the Health Commission for their support through the needle take back day, we had sort of anecdotal stories, and we collected those stories throughout the day on why people had these needles. And we had one resident that had returned needles that were 14 years old, and they were storing them in the basement because they knew it wasn't appropriate to just throw them away. But 14 years because their children were 14 years old and they had used the needles for infertility treatments.
So, Councillor Sabi George, just going on with the other questions, and this could go to the administration as well. How do we assure that if they were to contract or subcontract this particular service, that these companies are sure to contract locally, are sure to contract with businesses of color? How do we do that within this ordinance? Might I suggest that we require them to disclose who they would, if they're going to third party contract out, that they have to disclose that at the very beginning, and that they prioritize local businesses and communities of color for that in this ordinance?
We could ask that through the disposal plan. I'm certain, I don't know how prescriptive, or can we mandate private enterprise to use a specific vendor or parameters around that vendor. I'm not sure if we could do that.
Well, I think we can at least mandate that they give
Mm,
us a third
yeah.
party person,
Yeah,
right?
and that's definitely through the disposal plan.
Right, so then that's where I think having the community, as Councilor Mickey has noted, at the table to say, reviewing that plan, they could be telling the vendor or telling the city, there's all these other options, nonprofit partnerships you could have worked with. And in terms of being able to tell them what to do, we do mandate with construction jobs, right? Certain level of payroll services and diversity, and looking at our Boston resident jobs policy. We do that now, and those are private contractors. So are you amendable to some? Okay. So I just think that would be something that's worth looking at, and definitely having the community at the table per Councilor Mejia's suggestion would also help to widen that conversation. Sometimes people can be very narrow in who they think is available to them. Councilor Mejia, I think I hit the nonprofit consultants, stewardship and outreach, circumstances of disposal contract, the dashboard, and feedback. Those were your questions. I think I hit them.
Oh yes, you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Councilor Baker.
No, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just more listening. Thank you.
I see Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Braden have come. I called you before, so if you don't mind, I can go back in order and just get Councilor Braden and then Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I had to jump off for another call. I will catch up on the recorded video. I really want to thank Councillor Sabi George for this initiative. It's really hugely important, and I'm interested. Just the few minutes I've been listening, I'm very excited with the potential of this to really offer a very important service in needle disposal, and which will have benefits across the board for many families and folks in the neighborhoods. The only question I had, maybe, and I apologize if this has already been talked about, but partnership with their community health centers and in terms of education and outreach to different communities, is that on the? It's probably happening already, but since this is a new initiative, it might be important.
Councilor Mejia and Councilor Sabi George had addressed that as potentially one of the amendments to the process, allowing for them to be at the table to review the applications, but also that we will have to look to community organizations for education and outreach as well, and making sure they're culturally competent, as Councilor Mejia noted, to make sure people are just generally educated about how to dispose needles. I'm learning really for the first time how it's supposed to be done, but I don't have diabetes. I don't have needles normally in my life, but if I did, I wouldn't know. So I found this to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilor O'Malley.
No real questions other than to again thank the lead sponsor, Councilor Sabi George, and you, Madam Chair, for just staying focused on this incredibly important issue. Thank you to the administration. Obviously, this is I think we're all rowing in the same direction, and having opportunities like this where we can check in with one another to make sure that we're being as effective and robust in a process and drafting different policies and procedures as it relates to this. We don't need to, we all know it's happening in every neighborhood, just discarded needles around. We know the public safety. We also know that behind that discarded needle is someone who is battling addictions. We want to make sure that we can help them get the help and the support that they need. It's really funny, or not funny, it's noteworthy that one of my first hearing orders I did back in 2011 was establishing prescription drug drop-offs. We had a friend who works for the Public Health Commission over in the town of Arlington, and she talked about how Arlington had taken some refurbished mailboxes and used those as a way that folks could just get rid of unused prescriptions, because otherwise they would expire. There's, of course, I think the most frightening thing would be the worry that folks would abuse those, that for whom they weren't prescribed. People would sometimes just flush them down the toilet. There's a bad environmental impact. So I think that this is just, these are the type of issues that we're working on as a city that aren't going to garner front page headlines, but it's a really, really important public health piece, public safety piece, quality of life piece. So I commend Councilor Sabi George and all the folks on this Zoom for their great work, and stand ready, willing, and able to help make this as effective a policy as possible. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all.
Well, thank you. Just to conclude then, my notes, this work, we got a lot of work done. So I want to say thank you for everyone who showed up, but just for myself and for the lead sponsor to go back and to get to even more work. And I do want to commend and thank the administration, what we opened up, Councilor Sabi George opened up with noting that you guys had worked incredibly well together on this. But so then buckets left to still make sure that get into this is looking at the community involvement, 2 areas, the review of the application and education. The dashboard component, data collecting, third-party contracting. And again, just to look at, be open to it, what we can and can't do. Those are the 3 things I see. One other question I had, if it's not already done, could we put it in here? The kiosks themselves, do they have 800 numbers, or if you're facing addiction or any kind of information on the kiosk physically, so that folks would know that? Do they have that now? And if not, can we do that?
I mean, I'm absolutely open to exploring that. I think that there are certain Board of Health and Board of Pharmacy requirements around marking those kiosks with appropriate like biohazard symbols. There are certain requirements around that. My initial reaction is yes, that I think is a fantastic idea and suggestion. My second reaction is I don't want to create additional stigma to using and utilizing the kiosks. So I think it's, the kiosks right now are painted bright red. I think that's generally the color that they're painted, plus the biohazard symbol. And again, there is some stigma attached to those identifiers. And I think that it deserves certainly more conversation and reflection. Again, not something that I'm opposed to, but do want to make sure that that accessing these kiosks is sort of the least restrictive. They become least restrictive to do.
Fair enough. I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Any opportunity and touch point in which we can try to encourage our neighbors to get help, to get support, to find recovery, that's really, really important. But again, I do sort of want to be mindful around sort of the added layers that may disenfranchise or disincentivize an individual from utilizing the kiosks.
Agreed. And I think that's actually, again, per Councilor Mejia's, push to have the community there. They could really help with, design, location, churches, all these different places that we're not thinking of right now. They would help to push where that, break down stigma, but also include community. So I'm really excited about this. I think this is something that we can and should do. I look forward to, getting some of these things in and getting some language back out for colleagues to look at. But I just want to, in advance, say congrats to Councilor Salvi George. This is really awesome. And thank you for your leadership. So to my colleagues, if you have any concluding remarks, please raise your blue hands. I can just call you out, but if you'd like, but I just want to make sure we went through. I don't have, unless there's other questions, I think we have our marching orders.
And I don't know if anyone from the administration has additional comments to share. And Madam Chair, just to make sure that we don't have anyone for public testimony. I didn't have anyone registered myself, but there is somebody in the.
I have a Taylor.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's just someone viewing.
That's someone from is that a staff person or someone from the administration named Taylor?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Okay, I will just quickly text to make sure.
But I don't know if anyone from the administration has any other comments or anything else to add.
I think we're looking forward to moving this forward.
Yep. Same. Ditto. Thank
All
you,
right.
Counselor Sabi George.
Well, I hope I don't.
Absolutely. Thanks. Great seeing you guys.
Thank you.
I don't know who
Counselor
Taylor.
Edwards is just making sure that that isn't someone for public testimony before we totally wrap it up.
Yeah, I don't have a clarity, so I'm gonna, I'll go ahead and promote to allow to talk at least.
They,
Taylor,
Hi. Hi, this is Taylor. I was just listening on. I don't have any testimony.
thank
Okay.
you, Taylor.
thank you. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for your time. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.